Hello everybody, James here, story time with Dutch Mantell, episode 39. We're nearly at 40, T-shirts and books and 5 stars and all that kind of thing, but let's do the books first. King of Pranks, Owen Hart, written by me. Dwayne The Rock Johnson, The People's Champion, written by me. 2 fine biographies. The World According to Dutch, written by Dutch, and Tales from a Dirt Road. Also 2 fine books of tales of 50 years in the business that you will not find anywhere else. And if you want them signed, you go to Dirty Dutch Mantell with 2 L's at gmail.com and negotiate your, the price is fixed, but the postage and packing will vary wildly depending on where you are in the world. But we are going to be doing an hour's worth of your fan questions that you emailed in. But before we do, I thought we'd do a little watch along with a botch that you shared with me on Twitter.
You know, when you're watching Twitter and all of a sudden, you know, they have botches on there. Oh my God. Some of it is kind of funny, but it's not funny. Because what we're going to see is this girl, and it was a hell of a move. I don't think I've seen a guy do this move, let alone a girl. But you'll see in just a minute. She does this move, and we'll see the result of it.
Bear with me. Okay, we're about to watch it. This is for Stardom in Japan. And let me just slightly. There you go. Sorry, audio listeners, but here we go. Oh, good, it loops as well. Brilliant.
Oh, my God.
So a girl is trying to do the Kevin Sullivan double foot stomp, but instead of going up and down, she's sort of going directly forward.
I've never seen a guy do this, let alone a female, but she completely misses it or slips off. She overextends is what she did. And it's funny watching this, and I put this on my Twitter. I said, one thing you'll learn in the wrestling business, that concrete doesn't work very well with you, because when you hit it, it is as hard as when you get up as it was before you hit it. And I don't know why she would want to do this. So you say it was a double foot stomp?
Yeah, that's what it looked like, yeah. Do you remember the old Kevin Sullivan double foot stomp? But I mean,
I do. Well, I guarantee you wouldn't catch Kevin up there. You couldn't hog tie him and take him up there and have him do that. Because that's one of the differences between my generation and the one now, is because they take undue chances. Because this could have paralyzed this girl. You know, and I don't know, even if she'd have completed it, I mean, her whole weight would have been on that girl that she put through the table. I don't know how this could have ended any differently without one of them or both of them getting hurt. But like I say, it's kind of funny till you realize how dangerous this crap is. And that's why they say on TV, kids, do not do this at home. See, this is how Mick Foley started. Diving off houses, through tables, and doing all that stuff. But Mick will tell you today that he's taken so many shots to the head. He told me one time he was driving home and got lost. He couldn't remember how to get home. Now, I think he's better now, but it's about 10 years ago when I was or maybe 15, when I was with TNA, he was telling me. He said one time he was trying to remember his phone number and he couldn't remember it. So, but anyway, this clip here of this girl, they're going to remember her for almost killing herself. And I doubt if she'll get booked anymore because of that. And if she does, the promoter may well ask her not to do that spot. So I think she took this out of her repertoire, I said. So this was in Stardom in Japan. I'm not familiar with them. So they have men. It's not an all girls thing, is it?
I think it may be an all girls promotion.
Okay.
Yeah,
I've heard about it. I'm not that familiar with them, but there's got to come a point to when does this really foolishness stop? I mean, you can't just keep getting bigger and bolder and, more daring without somebody really getting hurt. One of those people, either the girl on the table or the girl jumping, was bound to get injured in that. Now that girl's butt the next day, she's lucky she didn't pinch some nerves or break her back or become paralyzed because of that. So, and if I was a booker and somebody wanted to do it, I would have reservations about even giving them the okay to go ahead. I said, that's too dangerous. And it is. Because what if they put that table up and the floor could have been wet, which made her feet go out earlier than they did. I mean, and then she could have hit her head. It's too dangerous. I don't know what they're making over there, but I damn sure is not enough to end your career or end your mobility.
There's only one person, I believe, and you mentioned Mick Foley, who truly made a lot of money and by doing stunts like that, and everybody else didn't really make much money, but a horrible load of head injuries and whatever else, and horrible injuries to show for it. And the thing is, there's so many of these stunts now that the only way that they're memorable is if they mess it up, and therefore it went completely wrong anyway.
Well, to me, the hardcore style was started. Well, I think it kind of got started in Japan, maybe. I mean, they've always had the guys that do that stuff, like Terry Funk and Stan Hansen and Bruiser Brody. They were brawlers, but they didn't do anything that dangerous unless they hit you with a chair, and they could work those. But this you cannot work. It is what it is. And I made the statement one time about Mick Foley. I said he did more to help the business and hurt the business at the same time than anybody else, because he substituted those stunts, those chair shots to the head, that crazy stuff. He substituted that for like working ability, because he was probably more suited to that, and I will agree to that. But after a while, you're watching Mick, then you're watching Sandman and ECW, and you're watching Funk, and you're watching those crazy people do all these crazy things. So they had an influence on the next generation of wrestlers coming along. So I don't know if I've told you this story. I got booked on the show one time, and the guy said he wanted to do a hardcore match. So I'll tell you this.
Was it? Yeah, was it an indie one?
Yeah, I ended up beating the shit out of him, and he never touched me. I said, if you pick up a chair, or even look like you're going to pick up a chair, first of all, I'm going to take it away from you. I'm going to beat the crap out of you. I said, I didn't agree to it, and I told you that on the phone. I'll have a match. And he went ahead with it. So we had a match, but him and his partner both were crying when it was over, because One Man Gang, I've told this story before, he had the hardcore match with his buddy, and he beat him into next week. And I never will forget, come back to the dressing room, and they were both crying over there in the corner. Oh God, they hurt me. But anyway, and Gang walked over there and said, hey, thank you very much, man. So what'd you hit me so hard for? He said, well, you said lay it in. Because you could hit Gang. He didn't care. He was about 400 pounds. He didn't care. So, but anyway, guys, if as anybody wanting to learn to wrestle, develop a character and develop a style, not that, because that'll get you killed.
We are going to move on to our questions now. And Levi Ward, I recognize his name because he used to submit questions to the old Don Morocco podcast from Franklin, Ohio. Just wanted to ask you, do you have thoughts on Dr. Death Steve Williams? He's one of my favourite old school wrestlers, and I have heard stories he was one of the toughest wrestlers to live. But I was wondering if you had any experiences with him, and also do you have thoughts of his involvement in the Brawl for All?
Well, he was a great wrestler. He wasn't a great boxer. And while he could wrestle, he didn't have a chin. He couldn't take a punch. And that was his downfall, especially in the Brawl for All. But he was a great collegiate amateur wrestler, University of Oklahoma. Jim Ross loved him. He loved Jack Swagger too, by the way. And he loved anybody that was from Oklahoma that wanted to go into the pros. He would help them. But Dr. Death, I rode with him a lot in Louisiana. He's not a big talker. Good driver, though. I mean, when you put him behind that wheel and nobody else touched it, he would get you there and he'd get you back and safely. I mean, and he would go. I mean, he wouldn't go down 80, 90 miles an hour, but he would hit 70, 75, and you'd make good time. But great guy. I never saw him have any trouble in the ring with anybody until the Brawl for All. And who beat him in the Brawl for All?
Bart Gunn.
Bart Gunn. And Bart ended up, he ended up winning it. So, Butterbean, I read a deal about him, and I met him. I don't know him very well, but he said that he told WWF back in those days, he'd put them over. And they said, nope, don't put nobody. It's going to be a complete shoot. And he went, okay. Because he knew he could beat them. He'd been in there with the toughest. He's 400 pounds or close to it and short, and he didn't have a neck. It's like his head set right on his shoulders. So,
and like a thumb. You know what I mean? He just looked like a thumb.
So, to hit somebody, you got to turn that head. But when his neck's here, you couldn't turn it much. So you couldn't really, he's from Alabama, but you couldn't really get him a good shot to really, I guess he's been knocked out, but I don't remember him getting knocked out or even knocked down, really. I was a pretty big fan of his. But he offered to put him over and lose, and they told him no. So he went in there and just beat everybody up. So basically, they killed what they were trying to push, and they would have been. But and they thought, guess who they thought would win that?
I know they thought Bart Gunn. Oh well, they thought Dr. Death was going to win the tournament, and then when it was Bart Gunn versus Butterbean, it was split 50-50 on who they thought was going to win that as well.
Yeah, but they thought that Steve would win it, therefore to enhance his character, that he won a tough man contest on TV, but he ended up getting knocked out. And they never expected Bart to win it. I mean, he didn't win it, did he?
He did win it. He won the entire thing.
He beat Butterbean?
No. The tournament itself, the Butterbean fight was many months afterwards. But the tournament itself, Bart Gunn won, and then they rewarded him winning by taking him off TV for 6 months.
We'll teach you to win.
Oh, yeah.
Don't you threaten us for doing what we don't tell you to do. Yeah, but the world of MMA and the world of professional wrestling is like worlds apart. So if you don't have a plan in mind going in, then you're lost. And I think WWE come out of that with the Butterbean thing with a big black eye.
This might be a very quick yes or no question. Do you remember an incident with Dr. Death? I believe it was him when there was either a clattering of heads or someone clotheslined him in the face or elbowed him in the face, and he needed something like well over 100 stitches to close the wound. This may have been in Mid-South, and he still turned up the next day.
When was this?
Well, this must have been like early 80s or something, or mid-80s maybe.
100 stitches?
Yeah, it was an absolute bloodbath, apparently.
I don't remember that. Never heard about it.
Okay, I'll research that and I'll get back to you on it.
I'm going to research it too.
Yeah, I believe
My
it's something like
God.
130 something stitches, and I can't. There was some miscommunication. He ends up getting sliced up horribly, and I think Bill Watts said, "You better not miss tomorrow's match though, or else you're gone." So he still had to turn up.
Oh, that sounds like Watts.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that sounds like him. See, Watts used to, when we go to TV, he would call a prayer session. And it would be Watts, DiBiase, and Jake the Snake leading this little Christian ceremony. And they would say, God bless this group and get us to the town safely, and God do this and God do this. And I was standing over there and I'm saying, well, God, I was saying, please talk somebody into going and buying a ticket so we can make some money. Because territory wasn't that good. I wasn't making any money much. So, but I cannot get over there. The ministers of Mid-South, Watts, Teddy, and Jake. So.
Oh my goodness me! There's we'll talk about this on a further episode, but you need to do the research and see if you can find your first match or Jake's first match with you. But we'll leave that for now, and I'll save that for another podcast.
But I read from last week that I had his first match in Fort Worth, Texas, and I remember that match. Still remember.
Should we talk about it now?
Well, we can.
Okay. From me. Jake's first match, and you had it.
Well, they say Fort Worth, and I didn't know that was Jake's first match. It may have been his first match on. He's had some. I'm sure he had some independent matches. I'm sure before that, but his first match with a regular company, it was. They say, was me and Jake in Fort Worth, and I do remember. I showed him, I threw the short clothesline and I gave it to him, and he took it great. And the people, they'd never seen it before. And they went, wow, what the hell was that? Because it's not up to the guy throwing it. It's up to the guy taking it. That makes it look good. So he wanted to do it again. I said, well, hell yeah, we'll do it again. He took it great and come back. And I'm and Jake's a big guy. He's about 6'5", 6'6", a lot bigger than I was. And he said, man, I really like that clothesline. He said, I'm going to use it myself. And then he took it to WWF, and he started using it. So it became Jake's signature move. So I used it one night, and the people said, you stole that from Jake. I said, you bastards, he got it from me. He got a bigger platform than I did to show it off. But it is a good move, and you never see that anymore. You never see the short clothesline. So if anybody out there is wanting to wrestle, get you a move like that that's not been used today. Whatever you do, don't do a super kick. God, that is the most overused. Hell, the Young Bucks, they super kick more than they punch. And they look great. They just do it too many times. I counted the other day in one match, they both did it 6 times. It's like 12 super kicks in that match. After a while, the novelty of it wears off. It used to be kind of a finish. Now everybody does it.
Did any of the super kicks lead to the pin?
That's what I'm saying. They just wear it out. If you do the super kick and you pin a guy, you can go, wow, and the people go up and then they go 1, 2. It's a sequence of events leading up to the 1, 2, 3. And when the people are right there, they're going 1, 2. And when they hear the 3, they explode. So that's what you're looking for.
Not to sound like Jim Ross here, but I mean, if they do so many super kicks every match and they never get a pin out of it, then maybe they're really shitty at throwing super kicks and they should get a better move.
Yeah, actually, they take it. but it looks so good. So how can you take all these super kicks and not get knocked out? One of them's got to knock you out sometime. It's like somebody punching you. Don't you think at one time you'd stagger a little bit or get a pin out of it? But if you overuse it, it's useless.
We will move on. Jimmy from Oklahoma, he emailed us about 48 questions. Do you know what? The majority of them are actually pretty good as well, so I'm going to ask a couple from Jimmy. Here's the first one. What were yours and the boys' opinions of the Billy Gunn and Road Dogg TNA WWE invasion, in quotation marks, in the late 2000s? Is that the Voodoo Kid Mafia, I think? Whose idea was it, and who worked on it, and who was pushing for it, and who rolled their eyes at it?
Damn, I would have He wrote about 5 questions into one. I don't know whose idea it was, but I will assume it's going to be Vince. They were in, where were they? WCW?
No, this is TNA, like 2006-ish around here.
Okay.
So you were booking at the time.
It was, I think that's a Vince Russo idea. Because it was a way to poke fun at WWE. Like we were allegedly going into a war with them, a wrestling war. And I did bring up one time, to have a war, wouldn't both sides know there's one going on? I mean, if we're at war with them and they're looking at us like saying, get the fuck out of here. But that didn't go very far. It was kind of one of those gimmicks that it has no teeth. And I don't know why anybody would get mad at that, except Vince. And he don't know a war's going on. So you're sitting over here spending TV time trying to make him mad, and he's not even watching it. He don't even care. So, and whose idea it was, say it's going to be Vince's idea, Vince Russo. And what else was a question from Jimmy in Oklahoma City?
What I'm going to ask is who came up with, I know it's meant to be VKM, the initials of Vincent Kennedy, but man, who came up with that pile of shit of Voodoo Kid Mafia for a name? That's the worst tag team name maybe in history.
Now, wait a minute. That's pretty strong for VKM awful. Voodoo.
Who could possibly go, I'm going to pay a ticket to see the Voodoo Kid Mafia. Forget it. I love Road Dogg and Billy Gunn as well, but that's a terrible name.
All I can say is plead nolo contendere, because I don't know where it came from. It just, I went to Creative one day and they had this idea and they already had it. But then again, sometimes, even while we can look back later and saying it was a crappy gimmick, but unless you try it, you don't know. The worst idea is the one that's never pitched. See what I mean? So if you don't pitch it, you don't know it. So we tried it. It bombed. We moved ahead.
Did you send them to the Alamo, challenge Triple H and Shawn Michaels, or was that another thing that you had no input in?
I didn't do that. Right. I'm having to think back. But no, I didn't do that.
Okay, we will move on. And same chap, Jimmy from Oklahoma.
Hey, basically, when you talk about TNA, the only thing I really kind of had a hand in developing was the girls, the knockouts, and the knockouts. That was. Have I ever told you the story?
Yes, we did a big long thing about the knockouts some time
ago. Okay, but anyway, that was my idea, and nobody wanted to do it. So finally I said, well, let's do it anyway and just give them to be and just stay away from them. And they did. And then all of a sudden, the girls, we did a main event one time, and we put Gail Kim versus Amazing Kong, and they do a 3.4 rating. Sting and Kurt Angle could only do a 2.5, and they did a 3.4. which that ended up with Kong and Gale both leaving because they wouldn't give them a raise. And I don't blame them. And then when everybody said it won't work, nobody wanted to have anything to do. 3 weeks after they started, they were starting to show the ratings. Now everybody had an idea. And I said, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. Nobody wanted them. So now when my idea kind of proves true, the only thing you can do is screw it up. Because I remember the first time I put the girls together, I called them all together. I said, and I've said this here, girls, you're no longer bitches and cunts and sluts. You're athletes, and I want you to beat the guys up. I want you to beat them in the ratings. And they all kind of hugged each other. That's the only group I've ever seen that was cohesive in the dressing room. Now, later on, they developed, the differences, but we were all pulling for one thing, and they got there, and I was proud of them.
The Jimmy from Oklahoma, the second of two questions I'll ask from him. Any low-key stories? No disrespect to him, but he seems like he may have been a pain to deal with. And maybe the only person with a voice deeper than Lanny Poffo's.
I have a low-key story, but I forget how it goes. We asked him to do something, and in that real deep voice, he says, I don't think Loki would do that, or something like that. Like he talks again. Remember, I talked about who was it? I said talked in the third person.
Luger, was it?
Luger. And Loki was the same deal. And he was kind of if you got him alone and started talking to him, he was okay. And he's not a big guy, but he does a lot of great stuff. And he didn't have many facials, and his interviews were just like they were in the dressing room. They'd put you to sleep. But in the ring, he did some fantastic stuff. See, TNA was invented for the smaller guys to do all these crazy moves. And he was probably one of the best. But and what was the question? He said was who put him in there?
He says he seems like he may have been a pain to deal with.
He was, because I had a couple of his matches, and see, I live by the slogan, the path of least resistance. So sometimes I'm not going to get in there and argue wrestling philosophy with guys that I just need to get 5 minutes in, 6 minutes in. I became a content creator before I even knew what the term meant. I said, guys, have the match. We need you to win. You don't need to tell the other guy he had to go under. He had to lose. And what a lot of agents did said, you guys come up with it. So I kind of put a shield up in front of me and gave it to his opponent. Didn't let him work it out. So all I wanted them to do was have a hell of a match. I'm not going to go in there and tell these guys how to do a match that's not my style. I want them, I would go back in there and they would lay it out for me. And then I would do some final adjustments, and we were ready to go. So that was my job. But yeah, he was just a little bit hard to work with.
Did he knock anybody out with a working kick at any point? Because he has done that.
Well, I don't think he knocked anybody out then, or not anybody that made a big fuss about it. Of course, if he knocks you out, you may not be able to make a big fuss. Hell, you're knocked out. So when you go in the dressing room, there's a guy going, whoa, low-key kicked him.
We will move on to the next one, the Blackadder. Hi, Dutch and James. Loved the show. Back in the WWF in 1995, there was a pay-per-view called In Your House 2 that featured Jeff Jarrett versus Michaels. Right after Michaels defeated Jarrett, both Jarrett and the roadie, Road Dogg, for a shoot, walked out of the WWF. What was the dispute about, and why do you think they left so abruptly? Thank you.
Well, that's not like Jeff to walk out like that, but I'm sure it was over. When did Jeff end up going to WCW?
90. Oh, it's either 96 and 97. So as far as I can remember, is that Jeff and Rhodey left after this pay-per-view, like July. Jeff turned back up for like a month at the end of the year, and then he disappeared again. I think he spent a tiny bit of time in USWA as well in 95.
Well, it could have been a number of reasons that they didn't like the way they were being booked, or Jeff didn't. The only way to make an issue of it is to disappear, where they have to deal with you, because he was going to, if he walked out, they'd be about 5, 6, or 7 towns the next week, maybe not that many, that he wouldn't be in, and they couldn't plan anything for him on TV. So it really throws the whole machine into another gear. Now they got to go back and fill in. So I'm sure it was either money or it was because guys didn't have contracts in those days. Guys had a contract, but what the contract was all for them. It was all for WWE. And I told you last week that the low number on it was $1,500. That's all they were obligated to pay you in a year. And if you wanted to work, and at that time, all the mom and pops, I call them the mom and pops territories, were folding up and going out of business. So there was nowhere to work. So if you wanted to work anywhere, you had to work by their rules, or you went and got a regular job, or you started a business, or you did something else. But I'm sure that's what it was.
You said this, I think, with the Jake Hager interview. You may still have the paperwork of that contract. Do you think you've still got it? Because I believe it was, off the top of my head, you were guaranteed 10 dates at $150 each.
That was it. I remember that now. But 10 times 150 is 1,500. Huh? That's see, that was their part of the contract. So, but then they got cheeky with it and would block you from going and working an independent show to feed yourself. I mean, they challenged that. Somebody challenged it, and that was a bullshit contract. And I think that's one of the reasons why Bret Hart went to WCW, because they promised him all this money. Now, at the time, Ted Turner probably had more money than Vince had.
Easy.
I'm sure he did.
Easy.
He did. So he could guarantee $1 million, $2 million a year, because Ted Turner loved wrestling. He has said without wrestling, TBS wouldn't have been there. His empire wouldn't have been there. I mean, it was built on wrestling, and I forgot what else it was built on. Then he started being a sports station, but he loved wrestling. And Bret left WWE because they'd pay him more money, and Vince couldn't match it. But at least Vince called Bret up and said, "Hey, I can't match that." So he says, "Go, good luck to you." But he didn't block him. But if he could have, I think he would have.
I've got a question for you. Early-ish 1996. This was actually the time of WrestleMania 12 in Anaheim, or wherever it was in California. Mark Mero debuts, and Mark Mero is very famous for being the very first person in the WWF to have a guaranteed contract, a downside guarantee. And then, at the same time, Sable gets a downside guarantee as well. What was the chatter in the locker room at that time about this new guy coming in, getting a guaranteed contract, and everybody else is still on this old deal of being paid by the house, how well the house did that day, essentially?
And this was in where? In WWE? WWF?
Yeah, 1996, March.
I don't remember the chatter about that, because I'm sure that chatter was directed amongst the top guys. And I'm trying to figure this out here. What about Ultimate Warrior? Was he there then?
He actually re-debuted that day as well, so he may have had a guaranteed contract.
I think he did.
Brian Pillman turned up very shortly afterwards. He was given a guaranteed contract, and then slowly, over the years, everybody's old deal ran out, and then they were all put on downside guarantees.
Well, the chatter. Well, now since you've told me that, I don't think the chatter would have been negative. I think it would have been positive, because if they're starting a new pay system where you can get a downside guarantee, I think everybody was waiting for their contract to roll and then renegotiate a new deal. So I don't remember hearing any bad chatter about it at all.
Mick Foley wrote in his book that he and Steve Austin, and they said they had nothing against Mark Mero himself, but I think it was the idea that he was not going to be as featured as Steve Austin and Mick Foley were going to be in 96 and beyond. Yeah, I think they were on something like 100 or so thousand a year, and Mark Mero was being brought in at around 300, 350,000. And that sowed some seeds of discontent. Maybe towards Mark than the WWF, I don't know.
I thought Luger was the first one to have that.
No, I don't think so. Not in the WWF. I think it was Mark. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, by the way, but I think it was Mark.
Well, I can't speak of any certainty on that, so I don't know.
Okay, we'll move on then. Ronnie Rice. No, I'm sorry, I've missed one. No, I haven't missed one. Ronnie Rice. Dutch, I really enjoy the show with you. And James, my question is about some of the older talent that were on top when you were starting, especially, change the paper, in the South. Tell me about Gentleman's Door, Weingroff and Karl and Kurt von Brauner. One of the Germans was actually a pilot. And there's going to be a lot of names here, so pick one or two. What are your thoughts on the Interns and Dr. Ken Ramey, Sir Steve Clements with Don and Al Green? I'd like to know more about Ron and Don Wright, Bearcat Brown and Len Rossi and Big Bad John. All are old names who would have been on top when you were starting out. Big Bad John, I've not heard that name in quite a while.
Big Bad John, he got killed.
Did he?
He got shot by some drug dealers or something in L.A., I think, or borrowing money or doing something. He was, listen, back in the days, especially with tag teams like the Interns and the Germans especially, because there was still really hatred for the Germans during that time, because a lot of guys had been in the war, and I mean, they just had natural heat. All they had to do was walk out on the floor, and everybody hated the Nazis. They were real Nazis, not the Nazis people. They'll call people Nazis now, but they don't even know what the word meant. But they had legitimate heat. And the Intern, same thing. I mean, they weren't Nazis, but that was the days of the manager and the tag teams. So they did well. Ron and Don Wright did great in East Tennessee. They were two of the most hated heels in history over there, I would think. And the thing is, they both worked regular jobs and wrestled. So they were weekend wrestlers, kind of, and they would just do TV over there. And I'm trying to think, how did they do on the regular job? If one was driving a truck and the other one was, I forgot what he did. But they were really, really good guys. And Ron Wright had a deal where he would put on his hand, and it was like Nux, but he knew a guy who was a welder, and they took that Nux and at the end of it, they would build a little bit of some metal and brought it up to a sharp point. It was only about that high, but it was sharp, and he could take it. He could hit you one time, and he had a lot of heat. So I didn't know he did that. So I said, "Can I see that?" Like an idiot. He said, "Yeah." Yeah. So I went like this and I went, and he looked at me. He said, no, you didn't just do that. And I don't know, you can't see my hand, but I still got a scar right there where I did it. It bled because I hit it pretty deep. I was just playing, but I didn't do that again, by the way. But and one of the questions,
was it the wedge? I believe
that's what it exactly was. But it was about this long. It was like the length of what covered your knuckles, and then it was a wedge, and it came up, and it wasn't very tall, but it was like a piece of metal is like a knife cutting you, and if you tap somebody with it, and he had heat with that for years.
Let's stick with Ron Wright then. So, how well did you get to know him? I mean, did you actually work in their territory? So was East Tennessee, did you say?
They never left East Tennessee. Never left. Because like I said, they had jobs. So they stayed over there with their families. Now I work with Ron Wright. He's a legend. Ron and Don are legendary in East Tennessee. Maybe not to the kids today, but to people who had watched wrestling for years and years. They were the resident heels. People hated them. Of course, they ended up turning good guy later on. People loved them. But Ron, he was a pilot, So he flew somewhere to this town when he was hot. And people knew he flew. And he did something the week before the people got mad. So when he left that night to go back to the plane that he owned, guess what he found? They burned the plane up. They set it on fire at the airport. It's like a private runway and nobody there. They just went out there and set it on fire and left it. So when he came back, there was no plane to fly back on because it was all burnt up. And they never found out who did it. I wonder why. So
Did you have much interaction with Ron in Smoky Mountain? Because wasn't he doing like a wheelchair thing where he was like
he did a wheelchair and worked it to finally one day he came out of that wheelchair and did a screw job. Oh, he was hilarious. He would talk about, oh my God. He'd take a rag, rub his head like, oh, it's so hot. I'm just suffering so much. Oh, you never know. And he was pleading, oh, pitiful me. People still hated him. And then they did this angle one night where he actually wasn't supposed to get out of the wheelchair. He got up and he either hit the guy or he gave Dirty White Boy something, which proved that he had been faking this whole time. And it got over. But I think he stayed in the wheelchair. It was actually a pretty good gimmick. I think I was doing commentary during that time too. I remember Bob called, look, Dutch, he's not crippled anymore. That's when you could use the word crippled. So I guess we would say that. But he was interesting to call. Did great interviews. He had such a Southern accent that you may have not been able to understand him. Remember you said some people there and even in your home country of England, you can't understand them if they're from certain sections.
Yeah, I occasionally get complaints that people can't understand what I'm saying, which I find baffling. No, I think I've got quite an easy accent to understand.
Yeah, you're easy to understand. So who says that to you?
Oh, I get the
Jimmy from Chicago.
Jimmy from Oklahoma may say that too.
Oh yeah,
I get the occasional comment, very occasional comment. Well, they're blocked, obviously. Well,
now people will write you and say, we can understand you. They're just going to make you feel better.
So. Yeah, we can understand you. Yeah, anyway, I'll try not to do a Southern accent because I can't do... I turned up, right, this is nothing. I turned up to one of these murder mystery parties years ago. And you have to adopt some sort of character. And the first thing I said was, if you're going to make me dress like a woman, I'm not turning up. So I said, so they had to change it and make me an Australian. And I turned up in with the crocodile, like an inflatable crocodile, the hat, sleeveless top. Made sure to hit the arms in the gym beforehand, so it looked pretty good. And then I had to like read out monologues as well all the way through, and it's somewhere, and the accent went somewhere between South African and just complete gibberish. White bread and brown bread in diplomatic community, and I can't do any accent for more than 1 second before it goes into like South African. And I'd never make it as an actor, Dutch.
So was that a South African accent you used?
Yeah, and I can only do anything that happened in Lethal Weapon 2. Because there was a South African character in that. I can't remember what the line is in it. Yeah, I can't do any accent. Can you do an English accent? Because you were talking about Booker T doing an English accent, and it was the dirt worst accent I've ever heard in my entire life.
Well, if I really concentrated on it, I could probably do it, but it sounded like crap. So,
we'll leave it on there. There's a little bonus story for everybody there. Stephen from Canada. Hi, Dutch and James. I love the show and listen all the time. My question for Dutch is regarding the Florida territory. I'm wondering what his opinion of Buddy Colt was, and if he ever wrestled him.
I didn't wrestle Buddy, but I knew him pretty well. But Buddy Colt, where I first became associated with him, was in the Atlanta territory, because he was a big heel there at one time. And when I say a big heel, they had local TV back in those days. And everybody that watched TV, it's like watching WWE now. If you saw Buddy Colt there, he's the big heel. And he had a lot of heat in Atlanta. Then he went to Florida. And by the time I got down there, he had already had his plane crash. And that ended his wrestling career. But he still had a lot of knowledge. I think he ended up being a part-time TV announcer. Plus, he had to go out there and get a job, because we didn't have contracts in those days. If you got hurt, tough. You had to find another way to make a living, because these wrestling promoters, they wouldn't or they couldn't support you. But I think what happened to Buddy, he crashed that plane. I'm sure there was insurance on that plane. So he had to get money out of that for his hospital bills and and he did suffer, because I think they had 2 plane crashes in Florida. Buddy Colt was on one. Bobby Shane was on maybe the same one.
Did Bobby Shane die in a car crash?
He died in a plane crash.
He died in a plane crash. Okay.
And I think
that was the Austin Idol one as well. Austin Idol was on one of
those. They had 2 plane crashes, and the one of them that I remember was a guy. He was a referee, and his name was Sonny something. Can't remember his name, but he was flying. And Tony Marino, he was on one of them too. He's dead now.
Sonny Fargo, is that right?
It wasn't Sonny Fargo. Okay. Sonny Fargo, he wouldn't have sense enough to fly a plane. But they were flying, and they had a cloud cover. The altimeter was wrong. That's a bad thing to have in a plane. You don't know whether you're 1,000 feet or 50 feet. You there? There you are.
Yeah, hello.
You clicked off. But he kept flying, and, you got lights on a plane. And all he was showing was clouds. And he was getting lower, and he thought he was at 500 feet, and he was right on top of it and flew it right into the swamp. Can you imagine doing like 150 miles an hour and going into a swamp in a plane at night? It's a damn wonder anybody made it out of there. And how do you know where land is?
Yeah, what direction do you swim if you do get out?
Well, I don't know how they survived. They may have, I don't know. I'm going to have to check into that. But I don't know how deep it was, but then you got the alligators and the snakes. I don't know how all of them lived out of that. I don't. But I made it I made it remind me never to fly with that guy again, and I never did. But I flew with it. I flew with Eddie Graham. He was a pilot too. And he was a pretty good pilot.
I've got something for you, and you tell me if I'm wrong or not. But I believe when I interviewed Jerry Briscoe, he told me that after the accident with Buddy Colt, he needed the money, but he owned a piece at the time of the Georgia territory. And I believe that's how Jack and Jerry Briscoe got involved with the Georgia territory. They bought Buddy's shares. And then obviously that leads on to Black Saturday, I think it is, when they sell their shares to Vince.
Well, they were doing NWA TV still every Saturday, I guess, in Atlanta. And then all of a sudden, on a Saturday, the Black Saturday, all WWF guys are doing the live show or the tape show in Atlanta. I didn't know it was coming. I don't think nobody or anybody knew that was happening. But because Jack and Jerry, I'm sure, didn't tell anybody, and they just sold out to Vince. And Jerry was smart enough to negotiate a job for him, and he worked there for the next 30 years after that.
So did Jack?
I think he only
for a few months.
But
anyway.
Jack, well, I don't know. I don't remember Jack being there, but he did for a while, you say?
Yes, they both went as a tag team, and then I know this secondhand from, well, I know this from Jerry as well, but I know this from Don Morocco because the Briscoes and Don Morocco were hanging out together.
Yeah.
And then just one day they were in wherever there was, Atlanta or Philly or in the middle of winter, and Jack just looked around and went, I'm done. And he just gets on the plane, goes back south, just send me any ticket where I go south, and they sent him off to Atlanta or wherever, and and then he never wrestled again.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like Jack. He just got tired of it. After a while, you reach a breaking point, and you said, "I'm doing this every day. I mean, I'm miserable." And after he sold his shares, he had money. So what's going to keep him there? Like Robert Fuller was on the creative staff in WCW one time, and they're sitting around this big ass table. You've seen those big, long tables where you can seat, you can seat 15, 16 people around the table or whatever it was. And Robert told me this himself. He said one day he'd heard enough. He just got up and he said, "Well, boys, Mama's got a full chicken cooking on the roaster right now. I'm gone." And walked out the door, and they never saw him again. He just said, "I'm done." He left. Now, that's the way, if you're going to leave, just say something, guys, I'm out of here, and just walk out. Of course, they didn't know he quit then. They just thought he just had an episode and just walked out. He never showed back up again, and they never saw him again.
I'm going to give you the best one I ever heard was Terry Funk. He was meant to basically do a job on Survivor Series 93 for the WWF under a mask, and then they would unmask him and reveal it was Terry Funk. Wouldn't do anything for Terry's career. So when he found out
Chainsaw Charlie.
No, this was before the Chainsaw Charlie thing. Okay. This is a good few years. Basically, they did a one-night deal. They were going to unmask him and beat him and see you later. And then he heard the creative, and he told Vince McMahon, "I can't make the show. My horse is sick."
I believe it.
Yeah, and then every time he went back, Vince would always say to him, "How's your horse, pal?" Every single time.
I believe that totally. Knowing Terry, I believe that. One time he got, I don't know if I should tell this or not, but like men do, they stray sometimes. And he got caught. He was married. He got caught with this other woman. And for the rest of the time, his wife would question him on it. And all of a sudden, he had like amnesia. He couldn't remember it. I don't know what you're talking about. And kept this up, I think. I don't think he ever admitted it. He said it wasn't him. And she finally, I think she got to believing that she had imagined it herself, I guess.
He just gaslighted her for years.
But he never admitted it. Terry Funk, great guy. I loved him to death.
I think we've got time for one or two more, and then we will shut the podcast down.
That is your serial go-to line.
I know, but I mean it more now.
Oh, you do?
Yeah,
oh, okay.
A little more than I did. When I used to say one or two more, then I asked you about 17. No, I think one or two more we've got. Who am I going to? What am I going to ask now? Sorry for the silence. I've got about 7 questions here. I'll tell you what. This is a long one. Ricky Morton's favorite wrestler, Chrisify X. This is a bit of a long one. So, how do you feel about jobbers or enhancement talent getting blamed when the signed talent messes up? I heard Paul London tell a story about Matt Morgan years ago blaming the unsigned enhancement talent for botches that he made. More recently, and often it happened with Omos in WWE. I know of a time in Charlotte, North Carolina, when he was supposed to launch a guy out the corner but ended up headbutting him while holding the guy where he couldn't jump and tossed him to the side. After the match, the jobber got blamed for the spots and making Omos look bad. Clearly it wasn't his fault, but basically, I'll skip the rest and just say stars blaming their mistakes on the jobbers.
Well, the agent's not going to buy that. If the agent's worth his salt, hey, it's up to the signed talent who should have enough experience, but almost doesn't. So if you can blame whoever you want, but really the blame lies with almost, I would guess. So I never heard that before. I've heard botches being made, but usually the enhancement talent took an ass kicking then. Look at the Road Warriors when something messed up. They just beat those boys half to death, which I've never believed in that, because if a guy messes up, he didn't do it on purpose. He did it because he screwed up. So to punish him further for a screw up that wasn't intended, I think is overkill. You just got to live with it. I mean, I've never been like that anyway, because I'm a little wussy. Some of these guys beat the crap out of me, get back dressed room. But I heard the almost what he was supposed to build the guy or throw the guy out of the corner.
Something like that. And somehow it ended up in a headbutt.
Well, if I was the enhancement talent, I'd stand my ground and said, hey, it wasn't me. It was you. And what you going to do? You're going to just blame back and forth? You may not go back there again, but what take blame that's not needed?
We will go to, there's a really good one there as well, but I'll ask this one. Randall, what was it like working with Jim Neidhart in Florida in 1984? There's a video on YouTube of you and Jim going at it while a relaxed Gordon Soley watches on from behind his desk. So Jim Neidhart, I didn't realize you had a little feud.
Oh, yeah. He was with Darso, and they were managed by Fidel Sierra, and he speaks Spanish. He said we had him as a Cuban because there were a lot of Cubans in Florida. And working with Jim, he was strong, he was tough, but he'd listen, and it was okay. I mean, we didn't draw a lot of money, but I mean, I was trying to rebuild that territory after Eddie Graham's Dory Funk had quit. Then they were looking for a booker, and Eddie Graham called Jerry Jarrett. Jerry Jarrett nominated me. Then I went to Florida for an interview, and I guess I passed it because he hired me. But when I went down there, this is what I came up on. A territory that was gutted. Dusty had left to go to North Carolina. He took with him Magnum TA. The number 1 and the number 2 baby faces left. Nobody knew they were leaving. I mean, the office did. The fans didn't. Then he took another, Billy Jack Haynes was there. He left. So when I got there, I had to rebuild the the whole talent structure. I had to build it. I got some help maybe 2 months later when the Freebirds came in, but I was trying to build heels because you can't draw any money without your heels. So it was tough. Finally, I got it up about 6 months, 8 months later. I got it up. We had a sellout in Sarasota. And I said, well, it's coming back now. We got them you just got to have a feeling that people are interested in something. And then I had Jack Horowitz or Barry Horowitz, the loser gimmick. It was kind of getting over. I had Brian Blair. He was kind of getting over. Jesse Barr. He was kind of moving up. But it takes time. That's why I preach patience. Patience. You just can't go out and I'd just go in the ring and just beat you up one day and expect to draw some money. People actually, if I did it more than once, they'd blame you. Because why are you going in the ring knowing you're going to get the crap beat out of you? That's your fault, not me. They were nothing to dislike me for. So we had a sellout in Sarasota, me against Flair. That's where I'd had another match with Flair at Lakeland, Florida. He blew me up so bad. I was embarrassed for myself because I was working like 10 or 12 hours a day and not working out, not getting any sleep. So I actually blew up in the match. And he knew I did, but he kept pouring it on. But Sarasota, I rested up. I said, I'm going to be ready. And then I went in there and we had a good match. But anyway, after the sellout, that's what I was proud of. The next day we went to Orlando and it was Super Bowl Sunday, I think, 1985. I think. And we got news in the dressing room that Eddie Graham had shot himself in the head and tried to kill himself. He was still alive, but on life support. And the more I heard about the story, I don't know. And I noticed Eddie had been depressed because Eddie is a hell of a guy to be around, but he was depressed. And I'm sure it was like, I attribute it back to the territory being so down, but it was starting to come back now. And I was glad that maybe Eddie could feel better about the path we were on. Because he would come in and he wouldn't blame me for nothing. And he preached that. You got to have patience. You got to have patience. He's the one I got it from. So if he wasn't going to get rid of me for having patience, it was okay to do. And then he died the next day. They unplugged him. And from that point on, I just couldn't concentrate. I just couldn't concentrate on the booking. Everything else seemed like I was just off. So I left about, I guess, a month later, 6 weeks later. Then I went to Oklahoma.
I presume that Mike took over the territory then. Was he sort of the final word, or was it someone else who was the final word?
Well, who actually came in was Wahoo. He came in, but it didn't get any better. I mean, it was what impetus it had then. It carried over a little bit, but when you change creative, that changes everything. So Mike, he took over somewhere. And Mike Graham, God bless him, he's dead now. I don't think he could book a Motel 6 reservation. I really don't. Because he wasn't creatively oriented to book several different stories at one time. Because he never had to before. He always depended on Dusty, or always depended on his dad, or, Dory Funk Jr., or guys who had been around. Really, Mike Graham never left Florida, really. He may have worked in a few other places, but not for long. He was just a guy that was there. That he was always a underneath guy. He was always a third or fourth match guy. Then they would put him in a tag with Steve Kern and bring him up, but never the main event. So, what was the original question?
Something about Neidhart. I'll just finish with this.
And Neidhart was fine.
Was this your first full-time booking job? And also who
Yes.
who was sort of like your inspiration to book the way you booked? Because obviously
Jerry Jarrett.
Yes, so it was Jerry Jarrett who you learned from.
Yeah, because I learned from Jerry because I used to ride up and down the road with him. And he said, listen, think of it like you're going to have a heel that that's people don't like him when he walks into the room. Don't try to make a heel. Have a heel like if you have a natural feeling about him. That's why Buddy Landell was such a good heel. You kind of wanted to like him, but you just couldn't. Same way with Flair. You kind of wanted to like him and party with, but he was just such an asshole. So that's what makes a good heel, because he would turn things. A good heel is always the victim. Everybody is always working against him because they're working. They don't want him to be a success. They're jealous of him because you got this and they don't. You got this and they don't. And the reason you got that is because, hey, you're the best, and they need to accept that. So if you attack the fans, you got them. You can't attack, just go out there and I'm the greatest wrestler in the world. They hear that crap all the time. Make it personal, and you got money.
There you go. It's worthy of the end of a seminar on its own. I think by the time this podcast comes out, though, the seminar might have already been recorded or done. So
done.
We will do some plugs again. We've got books. I've got 2. Dutch has got 2. You heard them at the beginning of the show, so I don't need to say them again. We have a T-shirt out. You people mean nothing to me. The Punctuation Classic, and hopefully,
do you have a picture of that?
I will put a picture of it up on the podcast. In fact, I'm going to start accompanying the clips with you can buy this T-shirt here. So we'll hopefully get some of those sold. I'll take a photo of when eventually one gets sent to me. I ordered one 2 weeks ago. Now, this isn't one that you'll order. This is like, do you know when you buy author copies from Amazon and they take forever to get there, but they're cheaper?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. Yeah, it's the same thing with these T-shirts. You buy them at a cheaper rate from the company, and then they take you 3 weeks to send them to you. So anyway,
do they say "ja" in Norway?
I didn't really. They just told me never to come back.
Where did they say "ja"? Switzerland.
Most places. Oh yeah. Germany mostly.
Okay. Yeah. Oh. Hey, get a T-shirt. It's a classic.
Absolutely. If you want one, you can buy them now. They're in the description. The link is on every single video from now on, so they'll be easy to find. But for now, thank you very much for watching. We will see you next week. And Dutch, thank you for entertaining us.
See ya.